Hello and welcome to another Cliff Reviews Art House. This time I'm reviewing the film Bread and Roses, directed by Sahra. So this is a very powerful documentary. It's about the impact on women's rights at the moment when the Taliban took over in Afghanistan in 2021. It's actually quite a good companion piece to the documentary Hollywood Gate, which I reviewed a little while back. They're very different documentaries, but they were filmed at the same period, just at that moment when the Taliban took over. It's a fascinating insight into what happened at that moment. The film follows a number of female activists who organized demonstrations against this sudden dramatic change in the rules that applied to women. Schools were shut, women weren't allowed to work with instant effect. These activists are putting themselves in really dangerous situations. They're facing impossible odds, but they were still going out and organizing these demonstrations. One of the activists said, "We're giving up our lives for the people." And they really were almost, many of them knew they were going to be arrested and possibly beaten up. And there's such a kind of courage in these activists. This is really a story that needs to be told, and it had quite big backing. Jennifer Lawrence is one of the producers, and it's been picked up by Apple TV, which is fantastic, which I assume is giving it a much higher profile than it would have had if it was just being shown in some art house cinemas. It's one of those films that really, really needs to be seen. I've reviewed on the channel the film On Our Doorstep about the refugee camps in Calais across the water from the UK. And I also reviewed a little while back the film Green Border. These films had a dramatic impact on me in terms of my understanding of the kind of issues facing refugees and the trauma that they experience, and how horrible and inappropriate it is, the kind of language we hear from politicians about refugees. The politicians focus so much on the negative aspects of refugees. But when you watch documentaries like this and these types of films, you do wonder, how can we sit comfortably when this is going on in the world? Now, I don't know the history of Afghanistan in any detail, but I do know enough to know that the West is at least partly responsible for the mess. And it's a really difficult situation. Sahra and Jennifer Lawrence at one of the Q&As at a screening were talking about the issue of gender apartheid, and that's what it is. The world can't just sit back, in my opinion, and let this happen. So documentaries like this are really important. And of course, in the UK, well, around Europe, really, there was such a concern about Ukrainian refugees, rightly so. But that definitely is not the same for Afghan refugees. Now, call me an idealist, and I am a bit of a naive idealist, but I think that the world should be making it easy for people affected by this change in Afghanistan, especially women, that they should be allowed to move to other countries, and that the world should be clubbing together to make it easy for refugees to come to the West. I don't think we can afford to have selective compassion. So you can see that this documentary has had quite a big impact on me. Some of the women managed to get to Pakistan and they're in a safe house, but even this is in a really insecure situation. The accommodation is cramped, they don't have money, they've got no life. I think there is even, Pakistan has been forcing Afghans to go back, and other countries around Afghanistan have been doing the same. It's a really raw documentary. It's shocking. It's very intimate because it's all filmed on phones. It's very different to the documentary Hollywood Gate, because that was staged managed. It was almost a PR piece. I assume that the Taliban, given that they cooperated with the documentary, that makes it fascinating, but it does surely mean that they had a lot of control over what was actually filmed and what wasn't. Bread and Roses is filmed with guerrilla footage. It's shot on phones. It's rough footage. The camera shakes. Sometimes it has to be turned off. And the director, over a period, collected the footage and edited it into a film. Now, I've seen in some of the reviews of Bread and Roses that there's been some criticism of the quality of the footage and the way that the film has been edited. I thought the opposite. I thought that it was edited in a way that made it really compelling, and the raw, rough at the edges phone footage actually makes it much more authentic. The Guardian reviewer, Peter Bradshaw, made a point about the blanking out of the faces of people. He said that he found this distracting and inelegant. I don't know whether he saw a different version to me. I don't recall seeing anyone's faces blacked out. But even if some faces had have been blacked out, I would have had no problem with this. Again, it's part of the raw guerrilla nature of the footage. That's what made this so real, so authentic. There's a constant sense in which these women are in danger, and this kind of guerrilla aesthetic works very well, I think. This is definitely not a polished documentary, but I really like it for that. This documentary is very affecting. In a Q&A after the screening, the film was described itself as a form of resistance, and I agree with that. These women can do so little in Afghanistan, but getting this film out to the world perhaps ensures that this gender apartheid will become more high profile on the world stage. I was interested in about where the title Bread and Roses came from. I was wondering what the roses bit was, because the women often chant bread, education and freedom. This is one of their claims when they're demonstrating. But actually the term Bread and Roses was the name of a socialist women's liberation collective which was active in Boston in the 1960s and 1970s. And that collective was named after the slogan of the Lawrence textile strike in 1912. So in fact, the name Bread and Roses has a connection to these other liberation movements, and in that way, the title is meaningful. Overall, this is a really important documentary. I think that most people would find it very unsettling, or at least they should do. I highly recommend it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.